In the last lesson, we did a little recap, and what we talked about was that going forward with Angular projects, we're no longer using NPM, Gulp, and Bower. And what we're using going forward is Yarn and Webpack. So we talked about Yarn in the last lesson, and I want to take a couple of minutes here and just mention what Webpack is. So Webpack is a module bundler, and what that means to us is that when we have all of these different JavaScript, so we work in TypeScript that compiles down to JavaScript. We have like all of these different JavaScript files, right? And all of these different CSS files and images and fonts and etc. And we don't want to have templates including, thousands or hundreds of different JavaScript files. So what Webpack ultimately does at the end of the day is bundles everything up for us. So you can find out more here at webpack.github.io. But as you can see, is you have all of these JavaScript files and say these LEC and CSS files, and it'll basically bundle them into a single file for us. So there's nothing to actually install here, but I do want to just cover a couple of things. So if you remember back to our tasks application that we built in the very first section here, we talked about how things worked as far as starting up our server, building, etc. But we didn't really have an idea of what was going on. So let me just recap that. So if we come back and actually start up our server here using ngserve, it's going to do a bunch of things, and then it just starts up and we're able to use it. But now that we kind of understand what Webpack is, we can look at this and see what's going on here. So as you see, as it starts to build this, one of the things it's going to do is Webpack is going to bundle up any of the files that it needs to bundle for us. And this is done under the hood for us because Webpack is kind of installed as part of the Angular CLI when that goes ahead and generates our application for us. So now you see here that we have this polyfill bundle.js and this main bundle.js and all these different JS files. And so what it's doing is Webpack is basically doing its job and bundling these files into memory for us so that we can go ahead and use them. So that's when we run ngserve. Now remember, when we ran ngbuild, we actually put a bunch of files into our resources static folder. And these are things like fonts and graphics, but then you'll see our bundle.js here. Here's our main one. You can see it all bundled up for us and compressed, and we don't have to worry about doing all of that. And so now we have just these single files that need to be pulled into our application. So that's what Webpack does in that particular application. Going forward, when we generate an application, you'll see a Webpack folder in there, and the Webpack folder contains all of the configurations for Webpack. So if you need to modify them at all, this is where you'll do it. So we see that we have our dev and our prod and our vendor, and again, this is all in configuration for Webpack. So if you want to start messing with that, I would advise you go out and start doing some reading on Webpack. But to get started, you don't need to know anything about this. I just wanted you to be aware of what is happening behind the scenes for you. And so when somebody mentions Webpack, you go, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's, doing X, Y, and Z in my application today. So we'll leave it at that. And with that, let's go ahead and move on.